Alright, welcome back to our next demonstration regarding some shop safety, and today what we're going to be talking about is going to be the stationary grinder. Okay, and I'm going to strictly stick with just discussion regarding the stationary grinder and not to confuse it with the angle grinder. Okay, our discussion will only be regarding the stationary grinder. We'll save angle grinder for another video. But the stationary grinder are a few things. First of which, on this stationary grinder we have our on-off switch. Green for go, red for stop. Press green to turn on, and red to turn off. Very simple, not complicated. But before we ever go about operating this machine, there are a few things I want to look for regarding maintaining my safety that I would like to take a look at before ever using. Let's start with the grinder portion of our stationary grinder. Now, this our grinder here has a stone, a ceramic stone, and we're going to be only using the face of this grinder wheel. Now, the face is just what I'm touching right here. The side to what we refer to is along this edge here. Okay. Whenever we use the grinder wheel, we are only using the face of our grinder wheel. We are never using the side. A lot of guys, especially those that are dealing with tungsten welding, they like to use the sides of the wheel. However, by using the side of the grinder wheel, you are eating away and creating a weakness in that grinder wheel, forming an area of breakage. Another thing that we want to look for with our grinder wheel before we ever use it are any kind of chips, cracks, or grooves that has developed on the grinder wheel. For the grinder wheel, these chips, cracks, and grooves are weak points. Spots that can be able to break away from as we continue to use the grinder wheel. Just so happens I happen to have a grinder wheel that has developed these weak points. Like a crack or a chip, as I put my metal to my grinder wheel, it could be a spot that breaks away, as well as grooves that could develop on a grinder wheel from continually sitting in one spot as I use this grinder wheel over time. So I never want to use one spot. I want to move side to side on this face of the wheel, so that way it wears down evenly. I continually remind students as they're using the grinder, make sure use the whole face of the wheel. Don't just dig in and use one location. Otherwise, we're going to be eating away and creating nasty grooves like what you see here with this example. Okay, so always use the whole face of a grinder wheel, so that way you're not eating away and creating weak points. Make sure that all guards are in place. We have our sides, no areas where we can have our portions of our project or even portions of the wheel project and strike an operator. We have a tool rest in the very front, and that we utilize in order to rest our tool project that we're going to be grinding, as well as setting up our appropriate angle to if we're going to be sharpening any kind of tool with the grinder. Now, what's very important about this tool rest is that there's a gap between this tool rest and the wheel, and it's very particular over that gap size. We maintain an 1/8 of an inch gap between the tool rest and the grinder wheel. That's an 1/8 of an inch gap. We never want to go too far beyond 1/8 of an inch, otherwise we would run a risk of having our project material snag in between the tool rest and grinder wheel. And also, by having that catch, we don't want to run any risk of having our hand get caught between the tool rest and grinder wheel. So we keep a small gap, an 1/8 of an inch gap between the tool rest and grinder wheel, so that way there's no way of creating a danger, a hazard of having the material catch within the gap. Speaking of this grinder wheel and that 1/8 of an inch gap, another thing is what appropriate attire, aside from maybe face shield and safety glasses. We're not using gloves when it comes to a stationary grinder. I'm very key about that. No gloves when using a stationary grinder. Any item that could be able to create a snag, such as loose clothes, jewelry, or long hair, and in this case also gloves. Gloves can be able to snag within the grinder wheel and bring a hand along with it. So gloves are not necessary when it comes to operating a grinder. But what do you do about smaller pieces? What if this is a smaller piece that if I were to put to a grinder, it's going to build up heat, burning my fingers? Use pliers or use vice grips when it comes to our material. If you're going to be using a grinder with on smaller pieces, don't risk burning hurting your hands on either the grinder wheel or burning them from that smaller metal. Use a pair of pliers as well as a pair of vice grips. And also on this particular grinder wheel, we will not be using any kind of non-ferrous metal. A non-ferrous metal would be any metal that's not containing iron, aluminum, copper, or nickel to name a few. This is strictly going to be meant for ferrous metals, steel and stainless steel. Our non-ferrous metals such as aluminum will get absorbed into the grinder wheel, diminishing the use of that grinder wheel, possibly breaking it over time. So never use non-ferrous metals such as aluminum when it comes to a grinder wheel. Enough of the grinder wheel, let's talk a little bit about our wire wheel on this other side here. The wire wheel is meant for shining our metal. You may encounter this at some points with our cold metal unit, or even those of our in our welding class polishing a weld on our steel. With this wire wheel, we want to make sure that we maintain a good size length of our wire. If we wear it down too much, it puts too much strain on that wire, causing that wire to be ejected from the wire wheel. You may see that with your welding jackets by having the little bits and pieces of wire get embedded within our shirt or our weld jackets. Another thing is the placement of where you're going to put your material. We never go above our center line. Remember, this wheel is going to be turning towards you. So if you're going to be above the center line, our material will catch an edge of the metal and come back towards the operator, much like that of a pitching machine. So you only want to be below that center line, or what I like to refer to as like a point of least resistance, to where if we were to accidentally lose grip of our material, it will go straight down and away from the operator. If we were to use above the center line, that material will come back to the operator, striking them. So use the center line below, so that way our material is going in a safe direction if, keyword if, we happen to lose grip. And also, more importantly, be sure to continually cool your metal as you're using the grinder and buffer wheel. So this way, you're not building up so much heat that you're going to be burning your hands. You want to keep yourself comfortable when using each of the equipment in our shop. So when it comes to using a grinder wheel that will build up heat, cool it down with a little bit of some water. And that concludes our discussion regarding a grinder wheel.